ZNS TV 13 presents a rebroadcast of the budget communication delivered by the Right Honorable Perry Gladstone Christie, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, on Wednesday, May 29th in the House of Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to present the 2013-2014 budget communication. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be aware that Mr. Ehud Cunningham, former acting financial secretary, passed away just last weekend. So I would like to take this opportunity to express my personal gratitude and that of the nation for the many years of dedicated and tireless service that he so warmly provided to his dearly beloved country. Mr. Cunningham was instrumental in initiating and indeed championed many of the fundamental and much needed reforms to government on which we are presently embarked. His memory will live on in the enhanced economy and society that will emerge from our efforts. Mr. Speaker, this is a pivotal budget in the history of our small nation. It is a budget that secures the future for all Bahamians. The economy has clearly, in our view, turned the corner, and we can anticipate steady, ongoing growth and employment creation in the period ahead. I would reiterate at this time my abiding optimism for the future in the areas of employment and entrepreneurship with the completion of the tourism plant of Atlantis and Baha Ma in New Providence, as well as developments underway or in the pipeline in Bimini, Grand Bahama, Exuma, San Salvador, Abaco, Eleuthera, and Cat Island, among others. In this budget, my government is acting decisively to improve the health of the public finances and to pull us out of the debilitating public debt spiral that we inherited upon coming to office. We are also strengthening the foundations of the economy to secure steady growth and private sector employment creation. In this way, we are positioning my government to have the resources with which to implement over the full course of our mandate initiatives that will strengthen law and order, promote stronger growth and job creation, and solidify our firm commitment to maintaining and reforming our social safety net for the effective delivery of relief to the disadvantaged and to the needy in our midst. Honorable members will recall that in the mid-year budget statement that I presented in February of this year, I laid out the critical fiscal challenges that confront my government, and I presented an action plan over both the near term and the medium term to restore our public finances to a more desirable and sustainable position. This communication follows up on the commitment that I made at that time to provide a more detailed elaboration of the comprehensive reforms and policy actions in respect of both expenditure and revenue that will secure our overriding fiscal consolidation objectives. Let there be no misconception about our commitment to healthier public finances. We have pledged to the Bahamian people an ambitious and targeted program of fundamental change to bring about better economic and social outcomes for all. Mr. Speaker, we will fulfill that pledge. Notwithstanding our improved growth prospects, as I explained at length in the mid-year statement, we find ourselves at present severely constrained in our ability to fully implement our change agenda. The fiscal mismanagement of which I spoke in the mid-year statement has left the resources of government stretched just too thin. We must of necessity be more cost efficient in our operations and aggressively seek to enhance revenue performance. The legacy of high public deficits and spiraling debt burden that we inherited is brutally onerous. Almost 1 out of every $4 in revenue collected by the government must be allocated to pay the interest charges on the public debt and cover the debt repayment. Had we chosen to ignore the grave structural imbalance in the public finances, the debt would have continued to spin out of control. My earlier assertion in February that we find ourselves at a critical juncture in public administration is founded on this sobering reality. The near-term implementation of the vital portions of our agenda, such as job creation, attacking crime, and strengthening the social safety net, will come about through a reprioritization of how public sector resources are spent while we maintain a strong focus on medium-term fiscal consolidation. I would remind honorable members that through our fiscal consolidation strategy, we expect to eliminate the GFS deficit and return the government finances to surpluses. We will also reverse the government's primary balance position from deficits to surpluses, and in so doing cause the burden of public debt to decline over time.
Yes, sir.
Fiscal consolidation and a lower debt burden are not objectives in and of themselves, but rather the means to the attainment of the far greater economic and social goals that we all cherish. For the ordinary Bahamian, it means that valuable public sector resources, instead of being used for principal and interest payments, will be used for the hiring of police and defense force officers, doctors, nurses, and for programs that fight poverty and the like. It means that we would have transformed the administrative bureaucracy of the public sector into a leaner and more efficient system that would of necessity have to be more responsive to the needs of the Bahamian people.
Yes, sir.
It is customary that the Minister of Finance would present his budget in the context of domestic and international economic developments. I will do so briefly and then turn to both our strategy for enhancing domestic growth and employment and the details of our fiscal action plan to restore the sustainability of our public finances. Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge the Central Bank of the Bahamas for its analysis, which I now summarize. I invite honorable members to peruse the analysis in more details in the annex. The global economy. As for the global economy, prospects have decidedly improved this year, but uncertainty and risks remain elevated, especially over the medium term. The growth of the world economy is now projected by the International Monetary Fund at 3.3% in 2013 and 4% in 2014. In the near term, policymakers in the major industrial countries have succeeded in mitigating significant threats to the economic recovery. In the United States, the risks posed by the so-called fiscal cliff have subsided, and in the European Union, the risk of a breakup of the euro area is less apparent. The IMF expects the U.S. economy to expand by just under 2% this year. followed by a stronger increase on the order of 3% in 2014. While the Eurozone economies, in contrast, could face some persistent headwinds this year because of the ongoing needs for fiscal adjustments and a strengthening of the financial sector, this region could also see some gains in 2014. While short-term challenges to global economic growth and stability have moderated, as the International Monetary Fund cautions, downside risks could remain elevated in the medium term. If there is insufficient adjustments in the Eurozone and/or the lack of comprehensive, longer-term fiscal reform and consolidation in the United States and Japan. Also, we must monitor China's transition to a slower, albeit still healthy rate of growth over the medium term. The implications of global developments and prospects for the Bahamas are clear. In the near term, a more buoyant consumer and business sector in the United States will underpin the ongoing recovery of our economy, and especially the tourism sector. In this context, it is vitally important that we stay the course with the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that we set out in the mid-year budget and capitalize on the near-term recovery to further strengthen our public finances. I turn to the Bahamian economy. As for the performance of the Bahamian economy, the Department of Statistics recently reported that the expansion of real GDP continued on a stable, though still modest course in 2012. The economy grew by 1.8% in real terms last year, in line with the 1.7% growth registered in 2011, but below the 2.5% rate projected in the 2012-13 budget communication. That clearly has had significant negative implications for the government's recurrent revenue collections, as was highlighted in the mid-year budget statement. Mr. Speaker, the bright spots in economic performance have continued to be tourism and construction. Tourism continues to record steady gains on the basis of growth in key source markets and recovery in the group business segment, along with buoyant sea arrivals. The incentive programs offered by the hotel sector have also made a valuable contribution. Output in the construction sector was buoyed last year by both foreign investment activity and public sector investment projects. The former was again dominated by the large Baha Mar resort project. In contrast, private sector construction activity remained relatively subdued, reflecting both the modest pace of economic recovery and ongoing challenging conditions in the mortgage market. As a result of the continuing growth of the economy, employment conditions did improve somewhat in 2012. Department of Statistics survey estimates that between May and November of 2012, the national unemployment rate fell to 14% from 14.7%. That is also down 2 full points from the peak of 15.9% in November 2011. However, labor force developments in Grand Bahama and among our youth was still less encouraging and remain, therefore, areas of clear, ongoing public policy concern. It will be important that our economy achieve appreciably higher rates of growth over time in order to generate sufficient new job opportunities, particularly in these two critical areas. News on the inflation front has been somewhat more encouraging. The National Retail Price Index rose by 2.4% in the year to October, down from 2.9% the previous year. The most significant declines in price inflation were recorded in respect of transportation, restaurants and hotels, education and communications, recreation and culture. In contrast, price gains for food and non-alcoholic beverages were more significant. International oil prices stayed at elevated levels last year, and this led to higher domestic fuel costs. Gasoline and diesel prices increased by 5.4% and 6.2% respectively during the course of the year. The fuel charge assessed by the Bahamas Electricity Corporation rose by over 15% in 2012 to a level of 26.7 cents per kilowatt hour. As for the monetary and credit market developments, the domestic market continues to be that of managing the weak asset quality in an environment where both the demand and supply for credit remain soft. Honorable members will observe from the Central Bank report that the stock of private sector loans that are in arrears rose further in 2012, albeit at a much more tempered pace. Hence, new instances of credit distress are abating. However, on a more worrisome note, borrowers who are already in arrears are slipping further and further behind with their commitments. This is the impetus behind our thrust to better define the legal protection for borrowers in a heightened environment of foreclosure. This thrust, together with a strong economic base, will cause an improvement in household incomes and the ability to service credit obligations. On the balance of payments front, the key highlight is that of construction-related inflows on investment projects such as Baha and the fuel import bill have continued to underpin the current account deficit that widened by approximately 1/3 to $1.46 billion in 2012. Aside from the extraordinary impact of the BDC privatization proceeds that distorted the 2011 outcome, other net foreign capital inflows were moderately stable in 2012 relative to 2011. However, with the increased import pressures, external reserves contracted by $74.6 million during the course of the year. At December 2012, external reserves stood at $810.2 million, equivalent to an estimated 17.5 weeks of non-oil merchandise imports, and down from 19.7 weeks at the end of 2011. The seasonal rebuilding in reserves began slowly in 2013, with the latest estimate through May 24th placing balances at $814.3 million. Prospects for the Bahamian economy in both 2013 and 2014 remain unchanged from the projections presented in both last year's budget communication and the mid-year budget statement. The International Monetary Fund continues to forecast that our economy will expand by 2.7% in real terms this year, followed by 2.5% next year. These projections have been factored into the fiscal forecast, to which I will shortly turn. Enhancing economic growth prospects and investing in Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, one of the key pillars of our agenda for change relates to our commitment to stimulate sustained economic growth in the years ahead. It goes without saying that as a prerequisite, we must have a safe and secure environment for both our citizens and visitors. I want to reiterate at this time my government's unflinching commitment to do whatever is necessary to reduce crime, the fear of crime, and guarantee law and order in our society. Through Project Safe Bahamas, we will continue to address this urgent matter by a fully integrated approach involving prevention, detection, prosecution, and rehabilitation. The agencies involved include the police, urban renewal, social services, education, housing, health, and the Office of the Attorney General to ensure that we attack the fundamental underlying causes of crime and fundamental underlying causes of violence, and to promote law and order. Crime generally is trending downward, but we have much more work to do. Many measures are being implemented by the police, the Defense Force, and the Office of the Attorney General. I wish to highlight that the government is allocating $2 million in this budget for the acquisition of new police vehicles in the coming fiscal year. This permits the round-the-clock presence of the police on our streets to be seen and to be felt. Another portion of our citizen security program that citizens will have noted is the installation of CCTV in the downtown and over-the-hill areas. This program will continue to expand in the next fiscal year. Between 2012-2013 and 2013-2014, we will have allocated in excess of $8 million to the police force to allow it to increase its manpower complement by over 450 officers. More specifically, in the next fiscal year, the force will more than triple the size of its recruitment and training class to 100 officers from the usual complement of 30. As well as we will begin a 5-year process to invest approximately $175 million in the modernization of the marine fleet and harbor facilities of the Defense Force in order to better patrol our seas and borders, protect our marine resources, and strengthen our capacity to respond to natural disasters throughout the Family Islands. In addition, we have also invested considerable sums to increase the manpower of the Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, Swift Justice has been re-implemented successfully, and it is having an impact. Before the end of the year, we will announce initiatives that will further expedite matters being heard before the courts. The broad thrust of the government's growth strategy includes diversifying the key tourism and financial services industries, as well as the overall economy, partly through the promotion of innovation in high-value added products. We also seek to foster linkages between sectors and to identify and remove impediments to growth, particularly in the business environment. Ministers responsible will speak more about this key strategy during the budget debate. More specifically, in the tourism area, the government is allocating $10 million in 2013-2014 to marketing the new Bahama Resort development at Cable Beach, as well as other properties on Cable Beach. As well, we are pursuing an expansion of airlift into the Bahamas. We are also targeting opportunities in the areas of medical research, sports, heritage, and religious tourism. The government is developing stem cell legislation as a means of further promoting medical research tourism. While the government does attach a high priority to identifying, promoting, and supporting new foreign direct investment projects, we are also cognizant of the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises that are important engines of growth and job creation. We are therefore developing a new policy framework that will enhance the creation and expansion of small and medium-sized enterprises and the long-term employment opportunities that they create. The consultation report on the draft legislation is scheduled to be presented to the government in June, and the amended legislation will be released for consultations in early summer, with tabling in Parliament is expected this fall. We are also striving to enhance the business environment through a variety of initiatives that will improve the business-government interface. These will include further expansion of the e-government platform for a number of government programs and services, including the e-submission of declarations to customs as of June 1st the e-submission of correspondence to the Ministry of Finance as of July, and the e-submission of requests for exemptions as of August. Reforms are also underway to make key government agencies more customer-friendly and their services more easily accessible. E-efforts have been focused in the areas of modernization of the Customs Department, enhancements to the suite of business license services, and services at the Registrar General's Department, as well as reforms to real property tax administration. Specific initiatives for growth are also being developed in respect of aircraft and yacht registries and an arbitration center in Grand Bahama. All of these are in advanced stages of discussion and development. In this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin investments in a number of priority areas. As an immediate measure, we have allocated $10 million to the capital budget of the Ministry of Works and Urban Development for urban renewal small home repairs. This program will benefit small contractors and provide jobs targeting our young males. It will support much needed improvement in the substandard housing conditions which many of the poor among us endure. My government continues to emphasize its commitment to higher educational standards and better outcomes, as well as more effective skills training, all of which are also vitally important to the future. My government has allocated, in the context of the country's strategy agreed with the Caribbean Development Bank, over $30 million for education, and this will be primarily directed towards special education and the transition of the College of the Bahamas to university status. In this budget, my government is also allocating $5.5 million of our own resources to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in 2012-2014 for the construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregory Town, and Los San Andres. Mr. Speaker, that is more than double the amount allocated last year and a virtual tripling of the sums allocated in 2011-2012. We will maintain and expand these investments in future years. As part of our broader education thrust, Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to announce that the government will rent and renovate Our Ladies Catholic Primary School to accommodate some 100 special needs children. Further recognizing the need for heightened attention to those with special needs, it is equally a pleasurable experience for me to indicate that my government also plans to begin construction in New Providence of a new educational and multi-purpose facility for persons with special needs. We are also committed to providing facilities in our schools for persons with special needs. In addition, we want to ensure that when they are no longer able to attend schools like Garventines, for example, facilities such as the one to be developed and provided where they may attend during the day, Mr. Speaker, will be introduced. This, Mr. Speaker, this will be planned in conjunction with the NGOs like the Organizations for Reach and Down Syndrome, other disabled organizations. But this facility will provide for them to continue their development and maximize their potential and ability to contribute to society, as well as the transformative effect on this section of our community. We believe that scores of families will welcome the opportunity to pursue business and gainful employment while their loved ones are in a safe environment developing fully their God-given potential. Yes, Mr. Speaker, put very simply, that means children like the one I have. The fear of every parent. If something happens to me, what will happen to them? We are going to remove that fear from the Bahamian parents and extend it into the islands as our resources allow. Mr. Speaker, again, this is only the beginning, as our public education system must become more inclusive in meeting the needs of students of all abilities throughout the Bahamas. In the area of health, I wish to signal that the government is currently reviewing all aspects, including costing of a national health insurance program. We are committed to the establishment of such a scheme during this term, and through the review process, we will determine how best to phase in this program in the period ahead. We are also committed to the construction of many hospitals across the nation. Currently, 2 such hospitals are on the drawing board in South Eleuthera and Cat Island, and construction is slated to begin in 2013-2014. Mr. Speaker, my government remains committed to the housing program. The grave economic situation that we inherited has delayed our ability to proceed as expeditiously as we would have liked. But we are now in a position to move forward with the construction of new homes. The Minister of Housing will provide additional details during the budget debate. Yes. As well, Mr. Speaker, the government will invest just over $4 million next year to establish, I better start over again, because I've been waiting for this one for a long time. Let me say it the right way. Mr. Speaker, the government, this government, will invest just over $4 million next year to establish the new School of Agriculture and Marine Sciences in North Angeles. To be built on the site of the old agricultural research facility, the institute will include a tutorial commercial farm and is projected to be fully self-sustaining within 5 years. Yes, sir. As an adjunct to the College of the Bahamas, it will offer diploma and certification programs as well as skills training, and its curriculum will combine both academic and practical components. It is estimated that initiatives sparked by the school could potentially place a 15% dent in our total food imports. Yes, sir. I am sure the member for South Abaco is sense of exhilaration might be the right way. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin the process. I got to say this one again too. This is important. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin the process of investing some $10 million in the construction of multi-purpose sporting facilities in the Family Islands that will give young athletes in these communities the opportunities to develop in competitive sports on a similar basis as those in New Providence and Grand Bahama. So say ye.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, there he goes. Right there.
In New Providence, Mr. Speaker, the new National Training Agency will come into operation. The mandate of the agency is to equip Bahamians with the necessary practical competencies and skills to meet the current and future demands of the workplace. That is, equipping our unemployed citizens to become more employable in the growth sectors of our economy. The agency will provide both training for jobs coming on stream and placement assistance to workers in finding employment. Mr. Speaker, this is where we must not compromise in moving forward with integrating our immigration policies into our labor policies, into our training agency, Mr. Speaker, and to hope that employers are enlightened in their approach and will be collaborating with the government in that approach. We will also, Mr. Speaker, begin through public and private sector partnerships to work on the development of a major week-long national cultural festival. I better say this again, too.
Yes, sir.
So I can say this right.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, and I say this in the context of having an incredible experience in Junkanoo, but this is different. We will begin the process through private and public sector partnerships of working on the development of a major week-long national cultural festival oriented to the start of the Lenten season. This will mark the start of a Bahamian Carnival or Mardi Gras. The budget allocates $1 million to this initiative next year. The festival is targeted for startup in 2015 and could incorporate a cultural village, public processions, and song competitions, costume competitions. We believe that this stimulus to Bahamian music, art, entertainment, and other cultural forms will reap inestimable rewards for generations to come. Various groups, Mr. Speaker, similar to the Saxons, Valley Boys, and other Junkanoo groups, would be led into becoming corporate entities.
One family.
These entered one family. One family. One family. Spanish Wells, and Harbor Island. These entities, Mr. Speaker, officially in the business of cultural tourism, would be selling costumes, including online sales, both here and abroad. There will be specific stipulations that a certain percentage of the contents of costumes will be made of straw and sisal. Such stipulations would stimulate and provide a much-needed boost to those domestic industries.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt whatsoever that we can foreshadow a burst of entrepreneurship from cultural tourism, including costume design and creation, writing and performance of music, dance and choreography, visual arts, lighting, stage design, and the protection of the intellectual property emanating from this arena. And you will find, Mr. Speaker, that thousands of people will fly into the Bahamas for this occasion.
Yes, sir.
It also gives leaders in the Junkanoo community an opportunity to be full-time in a corporate enterprise, Mr. Speaker, year-round, and hiring all the people who will design these costumes and make these costumes and sell these costumes in a very entrepreneurial way.
Yes, sir.
I can't wait to see the leader of opposition playing mass in this regard. No, you got to buy it. Mr. Speaker, that's why you say costume for 217. Mr. Speaker, I'm in the process of making a communication. We also note, Mr. Speaker, with respect to this carnival, this festival, this Mardi Gras, by whatever name we end up calling it, we note that crime statistics decreasing during the Junkanoo months. Junkanoo promotes teamwork and teaches compromise and other important social skills.
Yes, sir.
There is discipline inculcated in the practice of Junkanoo. We believe that these same benefits can be transposed to the pre-Lenten Mardi Gras or Carnival that will begin in 2015 in this country. Speaker, I want to go further. Once fully operational, the festival is expected to provide a significant boost to our tourism sector. It will also create hundreds of full-time employment opportunities for persons engaged in the design and fabrication of carnival costumes. As an example of successful public and private sector partnering, I would signal, Mr. Speaker, the new development in Bimini, which is now in full swing. A private sector cruise ship will be dedicated exclusively to that island to provide a steady flow of visitors. I believe that cruise ship has now crossed the Atlantic and is in the shipyard at Grand Bahama being refurbished for launching in July. But that cruise ship will ply between Florida and Bimini daily, twice a day, and giving Biminites the privilege of being able to travel at a very, very cheap rate, Mr. Speaker, to be told to them at a future date between Miami and Bimini. Mr. Speaker, there are also significant airport and port expansions in the make, Mr. Speaker, that we will be, and the minister responsible will be speaking to. In all, we are looking at the transformation of both North and South Bimini, with the people of Bimini being fully involved in that process. This is a very concrete example of the progress that we are making, and not only a wishful hope. This exists, it's happening now, and we will be able to see it and touch it. Mr. Speaker, we expect hundreds of jobs to be created by July and August, Mr. Speaker, when the casino opens and other businesses open to support that. So this, Mr. Speaker, is a reality that exists. I would also emphasize that throughout the process, we have taken all necessary steps to protect the environment. Mr. Speaker, a proposal for Cat Island, with again hundreds of new potential new jobs, is under consideration, very active consideration. In fact, I think we are at the stage in that where we only have to settle the provision of water and formally and the airport, Mr. Speaker. And then it is all to the races. Mr. Speaker, something that again is very significant to us as we try to stimulate the agricultural sector. We are allocating $1 million toward the installation of greenhouses for gardening purposes at the prison, schools, and special education facilities, the William A. Pratt and Simpson Penn Centers, seniors, and their children's homes throughout our country, as well as in urban renewal communities as a means of providing employment and a source of marketable produce. And Mr. Speaker, this will be done immediately and will be in existence immediately, and I can't wait to see the kind of connection that the people, whoever they are, wherever they are in these institutions and in the community. In fact, the properties in Bain towns have already been selected, and the numbers of people who will be hired to facilitate that development in the urban renewal context has been identified. So, Mr. Speaker, the government remains acutely mindful of the plight of the more needy members of our society. Even as we tighten up on our expenditure allocations, we have sustained our commitment to social assistance transfers to individuals in need through the Ministry of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, I turn to medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. As for our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, it is a comprehensive and multifaceted, covering both recurrent expenditure and recurrent revenue. As I have stated, we must arrest the deteriorating state of the public finances. There must therefore be an unwavering commitment to this process. I will provide additional details in this communication on progress to date and plans for the future. In terms of measures to significantly and structurally enhance recurrent revenues, Mr. Speaker, we are implementing a fundamental reform of our tax system, including the introduction of a value-added tax in July 2014. We are steadily proceeding with the establishment of the new Central Revenue Agency. We are continuing to pursue a thorough and comprehensive reform and modernization of the real property tax system. We are advancing our program to modernize the Customs Department, and we are moving ahead with the plan to introduce the new excise stamps for tobacco products as a means of significantly curtailing revenue leakage in that area. As for recurrent expenditure, Mr. Speaker, we are bringing the new Financial Administration and Audit Act fully into force on July 1st, 2013. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance. I want to say it again. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance such that it is better positioned to effectively monitor the operations and expenditures of all ministries, departments, and public corporations. We are taking specific actions to deal with electricity consumption, communications costs, and the management of government assets and motor vehicles, specifically across all areas of government. And we are closer to implementing the new framework to govern new public sector procurement. I will now turn to supplementary details on a number of these major new initiatives that are central components of our near-term and medium-term fiscal consolidation strategy. Mr. Speaker, with respect to tax reform and value-added tax, earlier this year, the government released a white paper on tax reform whose overriding objectives are to secure an adequate revenue base in support of our medium-term fiscal consolidation targets, while promoting enhanced efficiency and growth of the domestic economy. The cornerstone of that reform plan is the introduction of a value-added tax on July 1st, 2014, along with concurrent reductions in both imports, duties, and excise taxes. Internally, the government is now reviewing the draft VAT legislation. This document will be released for public review and consultations by early summer, with a view to tabling and passing in Parliament by the end of 2013. We have begun the process of public consultations, which will intensify over the summer months, leading to an updated paper on the government's policy stance on the VAT framework. The government is very mindful that the various stakeholder groups have different concerns and interests. We will listen and become fully apprised of all of these concerns. It would be imprudent, though, for me, as Minister of Finance, to give commitments to any group which could collectively undermine the importance of this reform process to strengthen our revenue base. At the same time, the government is mindful and will move cautiously to maintain the Bahamas' external competitiveness. We are also committed to mitigating the impact of VAT on the poor, and have commissioned a study to quantify these effects with the view of having adequate protection provided through our social safety net system. I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, we are not in any circumstances going to compromise on our commitment to the most disadvantaged in our country. You can rest assured of that fact. Mr. Speaker, as has been amply documented, the real property tax system suffers from many critical structural defects, and as a result, revenues generated by the system fall significantly short of the amounts that should rightfully be collected. Specific reforms have been developed which could significantly increase property tax revenues. Our reform process is continuing, and in this particular budget, we have included a legislative amendment to increase the coverage of the property tax roll. We will also modernize the information technology system supporting the administration of the tax and equip the staff of the Real Property Tax Division Unit to undertake computer-assisted mass appraisals. These various reform initiatives are comprehensive, and through their implementation, the RPT system will be considerably improved in respect of both taxpayer services and revenue collections. During his contribution, the Minister of State will give more information on these initiatives, including an update on the results of the RPT amnesty program. Reform of customs operations. The government has also initiated a major transformation of the Customs Department with the assistance of the Inter-American Development Bank, which is focused on strengthening both customs management and customs operations. The overriding objective of this exercise is to improve the facilitation of trade and to strengthen customs' ability to collect revenue and protect the borders. As part of client services enhancement as of June the 1st, all large importers in New Providence will be required to file customs declarations electronically. This will streamline the customs clearance process and begin to free up resources for deployment elsewhere in customs operations. The new Customs Management Act will take effect as of July 1st, 2013. This will provide a modern legal framework for customs operations in line with international standards.
Yes, sir.
The new Excise Stamp Control Act, which was recently passed by Parliament, provides for the stamping of all tobacco products, whether imported or produced domestically, upon the payment of the appropriate excise tax. This measure will significantly reduce the smuggling of tobacco products and provide considerable benefit in terms of reducing revenue leakage. By January 1st, 2014, the system will be fully operational with a transition to the use of excise stamps beginning later this year. Mr. Speaker, the new Financial Administration and Audit Act. Mr. Speaker, sound public financial management is a vital component of good governance, which in turn is critical to securing a vibrant democracy and supporting a buoyant economic growth and employment creation. When the revised Financial Administration and Audit Act comes into force on July 1st, 2013, it will enhance public sector administration, bolster transparency, accountability, and reporting, as well as strengthen control in matters of public financial management. This will be buttressed by a new public procurement framework to be brought into place before the end of 2013 that will reduce and contain the cost of purchases of goods and services within the public sector, including public corporations. In February, I stressed the importance of the Ministry of Finance becoming more intrusive in the management of the government's finances. In addition to the overarching frameworks for controls, for the first time, external monitors will be deployed to scrutinize the expenditure behavior of large cost centers in government ministries, departments, and even public operations. So said, so done. Review, Mr. Speaker, of all revenue areas. Mr. Speaker, the timing is never just right to ask taxpayers to contribute more to the coffers of the government. Yet, we cannot allow the government to retreat from its obligations to provide and maintain public services. There is a cost to providing services that must be adequately financed, and there is a standard at which services must be delivered, which correlates with what we are asking taxpayers to pay. Indeed, in many instances, the demands on government and the standards to which we are being held have risen without concurrent changes in the fees attached to such services. In the mid-year statement, we announced that we would undertake comprehensive review and assessment of all government revenue areas with a view to identifying means of enhancing government revenue collections going forward, but also to align these better to the cost of these services. We also pledged, Mr. Speaker, to thoroughly review the entire structure of excise tax rates on motor vehicles while bearing in mind the traffic and environmental implications. That review exercise is almost complete. The administrative measures and changes that we are advancing at this time are summarized in Annex C of this communication. The government will conclude this review over the next 2 months and will include a scrutiny of immigration fees, port charges, motor vehicle charges, and a revisiting of the range of fee structures and rates in the tourism and transportation sectors to bring them up to market levels. As well, given the heavy fiscal costs, it will be incumbent on us to reassess the entire range of fiscal incentives provided by government to private sector enterprises, and that is the extent to which we incentivize the tourism industry through cash allocations and grants. These reviews will include discussions with concerned private sector stakeholders. In addition, we will seek to establish a framework for the development of public-private sector partnerships for investments in public infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the revenue enhancements flowing from these tax and fee adjustments must, in the near term, contribute to keeping us on track with the fiscal objectives of our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. I will also stress that these adjustments follow a lengthy period during which fees remained unchanged and fell out of line with the costs of providing the services that they cover. In future, it will be important to subject all fees to a process of regular review and needed adjustments. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I will signal some of the more significant adjustments that are now being proposed as follows. Mr. Speaker, the structure of excise tax rates on motor vehicles remain fundamentally unchanged, but the basis for the assessment of tax is being reversed from engine size to a 3-tier scale of the value of the vehicle. Excise tax on cigarettes and cigarillos will move from an ad valorem rate based on value to a specific rate per stick to counter fraudulent customs declarations and disincentivize substandard imports that could have more damaging health consequences. Per stick. Mr. Speaker, a number of tariff rates are being reduced. A number of tariff rates are being reduced to provide additional relief to certain products used for medical reasons, such as defibrillators. For environmental reasons, we are aligning the tariff rate on inverters for solar panels to 0. And we're doing so in line with the new duty-free treatment for solar panels, and the duty on LED appliances is being eliminated to bring it in line with the treatment of LED light bulbs. Government corporations, Mr. Speaker, such as Nassau Airport Development, BEC, and the Bridge Authority will also now be subject to business license tax as a means of enforcing greater discipline on resource usage within these entities. As a most important change, however, BEC will again be exempt from excise tax on fuel imports as a means of providing relief on electricity costs, which are projected.
That's key. That's the strategy.
And Mr. Speaker, which are projected to decline by 6.6% as a result of that
Yes,
measure.
sir. That's strategy.
In this regard, I would stress that we are undertaking a critical examination of all energy proposals that we have received, such as that in respect of waste energy, such that we can move forward expeditiously with measures to reduce energy costs in this country. He said it's his. Mr. Speaker, we are also proposing to eliminate stamp tax on electronic banking payments, including the use of debit cards for point of sale and online transactions. Mr. Speaker, the stamp tax exemption granted to first-time homeowners will be extended for an additional 5 years to June 2018. And Mr. Speaker, within the $500,000 cap, flexibility will be permitted as to the proportions allocated to the conveyance and the mortgage. So we're removing the contradiction that existed, Mr. Speaker, as to whether you get exemption on the conveyance and don't get exemption on the mortgage. Mr. Speaker, both the City of Nassau Revitalization Act and the Family Island Development Encouragement Act will be extended for another year to 2014. Mr. Speaker, the business license fee regime, which is based on sales or turnover, is also being simplified with the elimination of most special rate categories, an adjustment in the maximum rates paid by larger firms, and a consolidated treatment of parent companies and subsidiaries. In the financial services sector, Mr. Speaker, a new business license fee is being introduced for domestic banks at the rate of 3% of gross revenue.
Yes, sir.
And a two-year phased adjustment is proposed for the fees on offshore banks and trust companies. With these adjustments, Mr. Speaker, we are also retaining the existing assets fee, base fee paid by domestic banks. These inflows will collectively increase the means for the government to directly fund costs incurred by the group of financial services regulators. After having been at current levels for many years, stamp duties on imported spirits are being increased. We are also eliminating the $10 stamp tax levied on customs entries and introducing a 1% customs processing fee on all entries, subject to a minimum fee of $10 and a maximum fee of $500. We are introducing a customs processing fee schedule for manifests and other declarations for inbound and outbound aircraft and vessels. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that in all of these instances, we are recovering the administrative costs involved for customs in providing these services. In the case of Grand Bahama, the government will, in 2015, also have to assume the cost for security and border control services at the container port now being done by the United States of America. We also propose, Mr. Speaker, to amend the Stamp Act such that stamp tax will be applied when Bahamian dollar dividends or profits are converted for repatriation out of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to fiscal performances in the 2012-2013 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the mid-year budget statement, I explained that the performance of recurrent revenues in 2012-2013 was not as robust as had been expected at the time of the last budget because of weaker than projected growth of nominal GDP. That weakness has persisted, and we are now expecting recurrent revenues this year to come in at 1.380 million, 1,380 million, down by 11%, or 170 million from the 1,550 million budget projection. On the basis of that weakness, I announced in the statement that the government would implement a number of near-term internal adjustments to ensure that we meet the budget GFS deficit target of 6.5% of GDP in 2012-2013. Through those measures, Mr. Speaker, we would have succeeded in containing recurrent expenditure in 2012-2013 to an estimated level of 1,659 million, down by 162 million from last year's budget projection. Capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker, should end up in the region of $350 million, down by 50 million from the budget estimate.
Yes, sir.
With these adjustments, the GFS deficit this fiscal year should approximate 6.1% of GDP, slightly below the budget forecast of 6.5%, Mr. Speaker. Even the leader of the opposition would say we're doing good.
He knows that.
Mr. Speaker, I'd want to move to fiscal policy 2012-2014 and beyond. In the February 2013-2014 and beyond. In the February mid-year budget statement, I clearly enunciated the medium-term fiscal strategy of the government going forward. And this budget is faithful to the attainment of the fiscal targets of that plan. In 2013-14 fiscal year, recurrent expenditure is being held to a level of $1,730 million, just below the level set out in the mid-year statement. Likewise, capital expenditure next year will be contained to a level of $295 million, not significantly changed from the $300 million projected in February, Mr. Speaker. I would mention in this context that we expect investment in public infrastructure to be bolstered in the period ahead by the public-private partnerships to which I referred earlier. I would also signal, Mr. Speaker, that the government will engage in roadwork projects across the Family Islands in the coming year, including in particular Abaco, Andros, Acklins, as well as others. Mr. Speaker, recurrent revenues in 2013 to 14 will be enhanced by the ongoing projected modest growth of nominal GDP. They will also be bolstered by the various revenue adjustments and enhancements measures that I have announced in this communication. On the basis of the measures that I have outlined, recurrent revenues in 2013 to 2014 are projected at $1,503 million, still leaving, Mr. Speaker, a gap from the forecast of $1,580 million. That was set out in February. Honourable members, I would draw to honourable members' attention, Mr. Speaker, that they should see this gap as an indication of the additional measures which I have not outlined in this communication, but which must of necessity be identified and approved by Parliament in the coming months as a means of bridging the gap. And Mr. Speaker, I expect that I'm not budgeting dynamic development in some of our islands. But notwithstanding that, my government will move, Mr. Speaker, in consultation with stakeholders to examine these areas that are sources of revenue and to be able to report to Parliament on our outcome as we go on. As it stands, the GFS deficit next year will reach $443 million, or 5.1% of GDP, as compared to the estimated outcome of 6.1% of GDP this year. The central components of the medium-term plan in respect of recurrent and capital expenditure and recurrent revenue will continue to engage beyond 2013-2014. As I stated in the mid-year budget statement, we will continue to exert discipline on recurrent and capital expenditure such that the levels of both continue to decline as a proportion of GDP. As for the recurrent revenue, the tax reform package that we announced in the February white paper, as well as the ongoing structural enhancements to revenue administration that I reviewed earlier, will contribute to a significant improvement in the revenue yield of our tax system to a level more in line with norms in the region. As a consequence, Mr. Speaker, and barring unforeseen developments, we expect to be able to adhere to the fiscal objectives of our medium-term plan, namely, both the deficit on recurrent account and GFS deficit being eradicated by 2015 to 16, the primary deficit being eliminated by 2014 to 15, and that is critical to reversing the upward trend in the debt to GDP ratio. Government debt, by our estimations, will return to a level in the area of 50% of GDP by 2016-2017, as opposed to a level approaching 70% in the absence of our decisive action plan to redress public finances. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I would stress again for honorable members the critical importance to the betterment of Bahamian society and our standard of living of the government's aggressive action plan to redress the public finances. We quite simply have no alternative course of action if government is to have access to resources needed to implement the vital program of change we pledge to deliver. We have been aggressive in pursuing additional revenue and reining in expenditures, and that is reflected in the better than forecast performance in respect of the GFS deficit this fiscal year. Right. The record speaks for itself.
That's right. Keep it going. Turn in the corner.
As evidenced by the measures announced in this budget, we remain assiduous on the path of fiscal transformation. The beneficial results of our plan are beginning to emerge in terms of economic recovery and employment, and these will continue to strengthen through the various initiatives in my government's proactive growth strategy. Yes, this budget, Mr. Speaker, begins a process of generational change to transform and modernize government operations as a means of enhancing the efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability of our public services.
Yes, sir.
We are also embarked on an unprecedented reform of the government's revenue system to bring its administration up to 21st century standards and its yield up to levels more in line with the needs of modern governance. Mr. Speaker, to some people, to some Bahamians, these challenges may seem daunting indeed. Addressing them clearly requires commitment, persistence, and fortitude. I want to reassure members and the Bahamian public that my government will not shirk the fundamental responsibility that it bears, and that we are fully up to the task of bringing about a better economic and social outcome for all Bahamians. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir.
You've been watching the Budget Communication presented by the Right Honorable Perry Gladstone Christie, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thanks for watching.